The year.
D&D. It's become popular with...
I really love these video games a lot.
Yugoslavia fighting continues as the
Clinton do solemnly swear.
Crack down on video game violence.
He has 80 gigabytes of data.
Internet is a growing grid of independent...
The future of the Matrix.
Is 2020. The world is in chaos, the economy is in shambles, and worst of all, gamers everywhere are pissed. If you're watching this video, chances are you're fully aware of the state that Cyberpunk 2077 launched in, so I'm not gonna explain it because your time is valuable and I care about you. However, if we jump to... hang on.
The city of Kharkiv.
Perfect. If we jump to 2022, Cyberpunk is in a considerably better state, and by better state, I mean widely playable, and can now actually be judged as a video game. And I'll say, I kinda love it. I rarely get really engrossed in games. Most of the time I'll pick up a game for an hour or so, then get bored and go do something else, and then eventually I'll just never pick up the game again. But Cyberpunk really pulled me in, truly like no other game I've played before, and had me staying up until like 4 in the morning playing it, something I've done for literally no other game except Minecraft. Once that game gets popular again, people will think that's cool. It may not have the fanciest mechanics and it can be a little buggy at times, but everything from the world to the lore to the incredible characters and the message and moral that still sticks with me months later really engaged me. And after about 60 hours, I finally finished the game and I was left with this deep hole in my life that could only be filled by a new RPG where I pretend to get as rich as I can as a cool gun for hire, when in reality, most of my money is earned by selling things I looted off of corpses. And as I scrolled through my Steam library, I thought, oh, I should probably play New Vegas.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day.
Fallout New Vegas is considered by many people to be the greatest open world RPG of all time, and I wouldn't hesitate to call them right. The way that it establishes its world and its gameplay philosophy of being able to truly do anything you want without completely breaking that world is something that I don't think I've seen in a game since it was released in 2010. Yeah. New Vegas is almost 12 years old. However, after coming right out of Cyberpunk, there were a lot of things about New Vegas that really jumped out at me, specifically in its story. Now, before we go any further, I just want to real quick underline for anyone at home, I like Fallout New Vegas, okay? I like it a lot. Really, see, it's in my Steam collection for greatest games of all time, right next to LEGO Star Wars, the true peak of the video game medium. But New Vegas' story jumped out at me as incredibly different to how Cyberpunk tells its own, and it really gave me more appreciation for Cyberpunk in the way that it tells its narrative. So let me tell you how Cyberpunk 2077's story is better in some subjective ways than Fallout New Vegas' story. Part 1. The really good things about New Vegas' story. I'm gonna try my best not to take every point in this bit straight from that 2-hour H-Bomber guy video, but I'm already gonna get comments that I'm copying him, so you know what? It's fine. Number 1. The main quest is actually interesting. There's that common joke you see on the internet about how no one actually plays the main quest in open world RPGs, and this is mainly because the main quest in games like this aren't compelling or engaging, specifically for a new player in this world. Not that the main quest/stories of these games aren't necessarily good, they just don't do a great job of pulling a player in, especially at the beginning. I don't care about my son or my father that I've spent barely any time getting to know, I'm just gonna go shoot things and find cool clothes. But New Vegas lures players into its world by playing on a quality every video game player has: innate selfishness. The beginning of the game with this mysterious man shooting you is basic enough to understand no matter who's playing, and gives you a perfect lack of exposition to draw you in. But most importantly, it's personal. I don't know anything about where I am, or why I'm here, or who this guy is, but he killed me, and I'm gonna go kill him back. You don't need to care about anything in this universe to become invested. The beginning acts less as an introduction to the world and more of a catalyst for you setting out and wanting to be introduced to the world. Number 2, the way it introduces its world is very natural and good. From the moment you walk out of Doc Mitchell's house, you are completely free to do whatever you want, including walking straight out to New Vegas. That is, of course, if you hate yourself and want to turn New Vegas into the world's worst game of tag, where you're never it and everything else else is it, and everything else is a horrifying biological abomination, and also you're dead, you just died, good job. The only ways to get from Good Springs straight to New Vegas are intentionally filled with some of the hardest enemies in the game, especially if you're just level 1. But if you do the short tutorial quest, it'll send you on a quest line around the bottom of the map, which will not only give you more information on where Benny and the Cons went, it also naturally shows you the game's main factions, arguably the most important part of the game's plot, both through quests, but also through the locations, which are set in such a way that you will very naturally come across them just through the direction the game sends you in. Even if you decide to give the sheriff job in Prim to the Powder Ganger and don't go to the NCR base in that quest, there's still a giant statue in the middle of the desert that makes you want to go check it out. Whoa, what's that over there? I should go see what that big statue is. The NCR? What is that? The game tricks you into voluntarily learning exposition about the world. It's incredible. Number 3, the trademark Fallout environmental storytelling. That's a long one, I should probably shorten that. I don't really need to go too in depth on this one because chances are if you're watching this, you've played a Fallout game. But Fallout has always been very good at being able to tell a story without dialogue and just through its level design. The Vault experiments are an example that comes to mind. There is literally a 40-minute video just about a single vault in this game and the entire story of what happened in it. And the quest or quests you go on in that vault never tell you outright what happened. Most of it is either through terminal notes or just things you pick up on exploring through it. It's truly stunning storytelling, and Fallout, not just New Vegas, is full of it. Number 4, delivering drama in a comedy envelope. This has always been a storytelling philosophy I've believed in very heavily, and Fallout executes it incredibly. I'm of the steadfast opinion that the best way to get an audience engaged in a story, or just anyone interested in anything, is to make them laugh. An example of this is... Okay, I hate to be another one of those guys who makes video essays about this on YouTube, but I gotta mention it. It's The Office. The Jim and Pam romance isn't the greatest love story ever told, but you care because you've laughed with these characters. You've gotten to know and understand them in a casual way, and while the show was doing that, they slipped in some character development without you noticing, and what the hell, you're invested? Not only that, but it allows the story and elements of the world to be very serious and dramatic at times, and because of the development you've been given in that comedy, they don't feel like interruptions to the jokes, they feel like an advancement of the story. Hell, when you were watching The Office, I'd be willing to bet you were more excited for these scenes than you were for the actual comedy. There are some shows that take this even further, with their comedy being so well done and so well balanced with their dramatic scenes that it allows them to be far more dark, bleak, and cynical. BoJack Horseman, Moral Orel, and a little bit of Breaking Bad would be really good examples of this.
So right now, what I need is for you to climb down out of my ass.
Fallout is known for doing this, luring you in with wacky ideas and crazy concepts about you foolishly gallivanting through the land, and then will hit you with the most disturbing thing you've ever seen in your life. Haha, look at me go, being a fun 50s apocalypse cowboy. I'm listening to the radio, I've got my revolver, my cool sunglasses, and my cowboy hat, and oh god, what is that? What is that? Oh, it's so scary. I don't even want to look at it. 1 minute you'll be hanging out with a fast-talking silly robot cowboy, and the next you're uncovering a human sex trafficking plot. The world of Fallout is deeply dark, more so than it is funny, but it can get away with being so grim by breaking up that depressing hopelessness with something a little silly. And it weirdly works pretty well. It's hard to be sad when you've got "'Cause I got spurs, that jingle jangle jingle" playing on a loop. Number 5. What it has to say. New Vegas is surprisingly an incredibly political game. And I don't mean political in like the quartering kind of way where like there are gay people and that means it's making a political statement somehow.
If I don't win this round, I'm gonna pee in my own basement. My wife went out for pizza without me and I'm angry about it.
But the two main factions, Caesar's Legion and the NCR, are criticisms of democracy and how sometimes it fails the very people it's made to help. You can talk to Caesar, easily one of the most evil characters in any Fallout or video game ever, and learn what his motivation for being so cruel and wanting to destroy the NCR is. And he mentions how after the first president of the NCR died, the entire thing fell apart, and how now it's nothing but overly bureaucratic, greedy, and corrupt. And the thing is, he's right. Throughout the game, you'll constantly see NCR soldiers and NCR-led outposts, both military and residential, who need help purely because the thing the NCR was supposed to do hasn't happened yet because they have to wait for the process of getting official help, or because the higher-ups just don't care enough to do it quickly. And while Caesar is certainly not meant to be someone you look at and say, wow, He really is just a misunderstood guy. I guess that makes all the slavery and crucifixion he did totally fine. But the game has legitimate takes on democracy itself, which is a lot coming from a game that came out in 2010. Okay, now we've established that I like this game, right? We all understand that? Okay. Now there are some things about New Vegas' story in particular that should be noted. Part 2. The things that should be noted. The big thing about Fallout New Vegas' story that makes it interesting and so confounding at the same time is its de-emphasis on character. Okay, so what do I mean by that? New Vegas' plot is very open-ended and, for lack of a better term, loose, and that's done fully on purpose. The entire idea behind the game is that you can truly take the story in any direction you want. But that kind of makes telling a compelling narrative slightly difficult. If you gathered 20 people in a room and asked them to tell you the entire plot of Fallout New Vegas from beginning to end, they would all have like 5 answers each. The fact that the game doesn't really have a set plotline is really cool for a role-playing video game, but in terms of a narrative study, makes the game very confusing. This is compounded by the anyone can be killed mechanic, basically meaning that for many characters in the game, it doesn't matter if they live or die, the story will go on the same either way. And this is what I mean by de-emphasizing characters. A large majority of characters in New Vegas' plot are, by design, expendable. You can see how telling a narrative is difficult when you have to be able to let it continue even if everyone dies. On top of that, Fallout New Vegas is one in a collection of RPGs made at the time that have a silent player, allowing you to create your own character and fully roleplay as them, choosing what they say and do and having complete control. But what that means is, the story doesn't have a main character. Because the game has to let you either be the great messiah of the wasteland or apocalypse Hitler, it can't really give the player character any defining traits. It's extremely hard to write a leading man or woman when the very idea of who that man or woman is from a psychological and moral standpoint is not up for you, the writer, to decide. It's like if when George Lucas was writing Star Wars, someone came in and said, I think Luke should shoot Han in the face in this scene. That's in the story now, make it work. And again, for a role-playing video game, this is super cool. But for a story, having a central protagonist that goes through no growth, has no personality, and doesn't really change through the events of the story is very strange. There actually is a main character in New Vegas, but we'll talk about that later. And there are plenty of games that have done a silent protagonist well, making the player character less of a protagonist and more of a straight man that the player experiences the events of the story through. Games like the Half-Life and Portal series or the original Jak and Daxter come to mind. Didn't expect to get a Jak and Daxter connection in this video, did you? But those games still have consistent characters that not only develop and change through the story, but also lead the plot along, which brings up another thing about New Vegas' story. Many of the characters don't really have much importance beyond the quests they were created for. For a large majority of characters in the game, once you complete the quest they're associated with, they don't do anything else in the entire game, let alone the main story. And I wasn't expecting them to give all 373 NPCs deep, introspective personalities and make them all have a huge impact on the game's narrative, but you'll interact with a lot of characters in this game, and then after you do their quest, that's just it for their arc, if you can even call it that. It can make many of the NPCs in the game feel less like people and more like what they actually are, lines of code that dispense text and audio when a button is pressed. This is also made worse by the fact that, again, there are 373 NPCs. The game is packed with characters, and that results in very few of them actually having much, if any, character depth. Which is fine, you can't develop every single person in your story. Sometimes you gotta have a guy that's just the shopkeeper. But even some of the characters that are far more integral to the game's story don't have an incredible amount of depth to them. We're gonna talk about this a little bit more later, but for right now, we're gonna move on. Now, I'll say 2 things. One, these things are mainly seen in the central quest of the game. Many of the game's side quests are essentially short stories that take place in the Fallout universe and often have their own protagonist NPC that you'll be helping or talking to frequently, and those quests all work exceedingly well. Like I said before, many of the characters don't really have much importance past the quest they're involved in, but the quests themselves are very well-made mini-narratives and kind of make you forget/not really care about seeing them after the quest, as their story has reached a natural conclusion. 2, these are absolutely not necessarily bad things. The writer writers of New Vegas were creating an open world RPG where you could do anything you wanted. They were not making a movie or a TV show where characters are much more important, and in the medium of video games, you can absolutely get away with having characters be less defined or playing a smaller part in your story and still have the narrative be good. The best thing I can compare New Vegas's plot to is some of the old, lightly serialized television shows of the pre-2000s. This is gonna be a deep cut, so just watch out here. Shows like The Incredible Hulk or Quantum Leap that focus less on developing a much larger story like more modern shows such as Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, Stranger Things, etc., and more on telling many smaller, more contained ones connected through a single, albeit thin, plotline. Most modern dramatic TV shows will have some kind of plot for the episode, but it will also be highly connected to the overarching narrative of the season or the entire show. You can't just throw on season 4, episode 3 of Better Call Saul. That's not how TV works anymore. But with the way TV was at the time, many of these shows were made to be caught out of order so that you could still enjoy a short story even if you had never seen the show before. Many of New Vegas's quests kind of act this way too. I would say most quests don't have anything to do with the main plot and don't even necessarily have to take place in New Vegas and could fit in any Fallout game. But it raises an interesting question. What would an RPG be like if it was less like these shows and more like these shows? Having its quests and missions be more focused and consistent, and making the side stories and quests intertwine with the main plot, resulting in them all ultimately supporting the message of the story, and having multiple plot threads that are all happening concurrently culminate into a single concise story and message. What would that kind of RPG be like if it existed? I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, but that game does exist, and it's called Cyberpunk 2077. So before I start this section, I just want to very quickly say, you should play Cyberpunk 2077. I'm not going to spoil the game or its endings, but I will be going over some basic stuff, some of the core plot threads that are revealed to you very early on. It is in a fully playable state now. It is very often half off for just $30 on digital marketplaces. If you have a PS5, an Xbox Series X or S, or a powerful enough PC, you should play Cyberpunk. If you want to go in totally blind like I did, go and play it, then come back to this video. I'll give you a second to play it real quick. Go ahead, I'm serious. You done? Okay, great. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game about dying. You are V, a mercenary living in Night City with dreams of becoming a legend and securing your name in history as one of Night City's best. However, that dream is put on hold after a job gone bad gives you a mysterious illness that, as far as you or anyone you plead for help can tell, is incurable and is also slowly killing you. And by slowly killing you, I mean replacing your consciousness with that of Johnny Silverhand, a rock star who supposedly died way back in 2023 during a terrorist attack that he led. It's up to V to find a way to keep themselves from dying, all the while slowly succumbing to the effects of Johnny taking over. Listen, I'm not gonna pretend like this game has always been perfect. CD Projekt Red is fully aware of the state this game released in. But with the 1.5 update, the game feels finished. It's still not the thing that we were told it was gonna be way back in that E3 demo. It probably never will be, but it is a full, stable video game. I'm not gonna go too in-depth into the gameplay because I really want to focus on the game's story, but in my opinion, the game is very fun. A lot of its RPG elements are very Witcher-esque, which makes sense, and if you enjoy Fallout 4's gunplay and combat, you'll probably enjoy Cyberpunk's even more. It's much more in-depth and there's a lot of different builds and strategies you can take. Cyberpunk does multiple really interesting things with its narrative, and I'm gonna do another numbered list because oh my god, those are so easy to write. Number 1, the importance of the plot. The most interesting thing about how Cyberpunk tells its story and what separates it from other open-world RPGs is that it keeps its main plot prevalent throughout the game. Like I said earlier, some of the quests in New Vegas aren't really dependent on them taking place in the Mojave Wasteland or even during the events of Fallout New Vegas at all. But Cyberpunk does an incredible job intertwining the plot with its side missions, world, and gameplay, never letting you forget what you're doing and why you're doing it, keeping you really immersed in not only the world, but its characters and narrative. On top of keeping the fact that you're actively trying to find a cure and save yourself on the surface of many interactions and quests, one of the incredible ways it keeps focus on the main plot is through relic malfunctions, a subtle but narratively impactful plot device. You'll randomly get relic malfunctions that will glitch out your visuals and make you unable to do certain things for a few seconds until it subsides, and it gets worse and worse as the game progresses. This shows up narratively not only in the main quests, but the side ones as well, and as it gets really bad in the late game, it gives you the option to either fess up and tell the people around you that you're dying, or don't, distancing yourself in an attempt to keep from hurting them if you actually do die. The fact that it appears in side quests too is super cool. It really helps tie the game together and make the entire experience feel much more unified rather than the unrelated short story format of New Vegas. There are several times throughout the story where things seem to be going pretty okay for V. Celebrating after a successful job, hanging out with new friends they've met on their journey, having an impactful heart-to-heart, and in those moments, things are good. V is happy. And then the relic malfunctions. And suddenly, V is brought back to reality. They're reminded that they're running out of time, and that this, as good as it makes them feel, is all going to go away, unless they find something to do about it, and fast. It's time to get back to work. Number 2, the way it does quests. The game has this very interesting take on its mission structure, where it'll give you multiple different main missions to do at one time, and it lets you choose which order to do them in. It's similar to a Rockstar game, but it's done a lot more naturally and is a bit more complex. Sometimes in a GTA or a Red Dead, you'll have like 3 or maybe even 4 missions available to you at one time, and then once you complete all of those, the mission to actually progress the story will open up. Those missions will often have important story beats in them, but they can kind of feel like they're just prerequisites you have to complete before you can really continue the plot. However, Cyberpunk does this in a much more fluid way, instead having multiple quests associated with specific plot lines and characters all happening at one time, basically meaning there is no main quest. This makes the entire story very non-linear. To give you a good idea of what I'm talking about, the Cyberpunk wiki has all of the main quests in this one article. This quest, where you meet the Voodoo Boys for the first time, is number 6 on the list, and this quest, where you meet Pan Am for the first time, is number 10 on the list. However, I did this quest towards the very beginning of the game, and this quest was the one I played before the very end. And in my second playthrough, Maptan Palan, which is almost definitely not how you pronounce that, I am so sorry, was more or less the 4th main quest I did in the game because I just decided to play different quests first that time. You may also notice that the wiki sorts these missions not through chronology, but through what path they're associated with. It even has this genius idea of setting some quests on realistic wait timers while certain characters prepare for something, or maybe you'll just have to wait until they need you again, which sounds like it'd be annoying having to wait an arbitrary amount of time before you can play the next quest in that path, but this is done to subtly encourage you to check in on the other quest lines instead of just blowing through one at a time. Instead of going the kind of standard open world RPG game route of complete this mission to unlock the next 1 or 2, it goes in an incredibly interesting direction of letting you choose which parts of the story are most pressing to you. There's a set number of missions in each quest line that you have to complete in order to finish the game, but once you've done the ones required, the quest line will often keep going. New, completely optional quests are made available that further develop the characters associated with that plot line and will even open the door for new, different endings, enhancing the idea of what is important to you right now. New Vegas has a slightly similar structure with its side bets quests, but that one is technically optional because you'd only have to do that if you were going for the independent ending, and it's still well done, and I do like how they execute it, but I certainly wouldn't say that's the way New Vegas' story is told like I would with Cyberpunk. The idea of complete this mission to continue is so expertly thrown out in Cyberpunk that I seriously couldn't tell what the main quest line was, because in reality, there just isn't one. It's super cool. Number 3. Character push. Okay, let's do a bit of compare and contrast here. There are a lot of quests in Fallout New Vegas given to you by a wide cast of characters, but like, the reason you do a lot of these quests isn't for the most noble reasons. Even if you're playing as a 100% lawful good character whose goal is to vanquish evil and let the powers of love and justice prevail, you're doing these quests for XP and caps. There's often not many other reasons. I'm not sitting through a bunch of loading screens to get this boomer kid a girlfriend because I really care about his happiness and I want to see him do well. I'm doing it because he'll give me money. This kind of goes back to what I said before, but it's slightly the result of New Vegas's abundance of characters. When you've got as many NPCs and quest givers as New Vegas does, and when you have 18 months to make an entire video game, oh my god, you don't have a lot of game time to flesh out every single one of them. And with standard NPCs that you meet once and then leave town to never see again, that's normally fine, but the problem is this is also prevalent in some of the more consistent and plot integral characters as well, and it's especially a problem with companions. As much as I like many of the standout characters in New Vegas, a lot of them, specifically the companions, unfortunately suffer from the same shortcomings the smaller NPCs do. Their entire character is centralized into their one arc, often just one quest long, and then once that's done, their entire character depth has been exhausted. You can talk to them and they'll make comments on things that are currently happening or armors that you're wearing, and can even leave you depending on who you align yourself with or what actions you decide to do, but once their quest is complete, they pretty much stay completely static characters for the rest of the game. Cassidy has one quest associated with her. Technically 3 if you count the courier being sent to kill her or convince her to sell her caravan. This is the case for a sizable portion of New Vegas's NPCs. For real, look up a New Vegas character and see just how many quests they're associated with. I guarantee you 90% of the time it'll be like 2, 3, maybe even technically 4 max. Seriously, look up Veronica, look up Lily, look up Atomic Wrangler Crier. Actually, don't look that one up. Don't look that one up. It makes a lot of characters have very little personality and feel extremely forgettable, and they didn't really have to make the characters that deep to make New Vegas' story work, so they didn't. We're gonna talk about why they didn't have to do that later, just hang on. Cyberpunk 2077, however, is led by its characters. Panam, Takamura, Evelyn, Wakako, Rogue, Carrie, Dexter, Judy, Jackie, Johnny, all of these characters not only shine in their own special way, but are also the driving force behind the story. They are at the forefront of this game at all times. They are developed, acted, and written in such unique ways from each other that it makes the reason you do their quests not because you just want the XP, but because you've become immersed in the world and story and you want to see these characters grow. They are constantly given center stage in quests, and the incredible writing and dialogue allows for some great moments with these people that you really feel like you're building a relationship with. One of the things I think is truly genius about this game is the phone. It's a very small and simple thing, but the phone calls you get from characters or that you can make yourself, and especially the little optional texts you get, really make the people in this game feel just like that. People. Number 4. Some pretty good environmental storytelling, and some really good environmental storytelling. That one's longer than the last one, oh my god. Like Fallout, Cyberpunk does have some very interesting environmental storytelling, even if it definitely isn't as in-depth as New Vegas in some ways. While New Vegas uses its environment as a way of spinning small stories, Cyberpunk uses it as a way of expanding upon and fleshing out its world. This is especially seen in Night City. If you've heard anything good about Cyberpunk 2077, chances are it's that its open world is incredible. Giant towering skyscrapers of the expensive corporate district are separated by shack houses built on top of construction supports for buildings that were never finished. The outskirts of the city include suburbs that are almost just as dystopian as the capitalist-infused inner city. Pacifica, once a bustling high-end vacation spot, sits practically deserted, being considered a lawless war zone. And the Badlands, only truly inhabited by the nomads, is a vast desert of nothing, broken up by small towns, nomad camps, and giant resource extraction sites set up by the corporations. The open world has an incredible amount of variety to it, with sections of the city feeling substantially different to others. Districts also have varying enemy difficulties and higher default police and gang member levels, making certain parts of the city seriously dangerous. You might walk by a couple of thugs holding somebody up or harassing a citizen, and your natural video game reaction is to go and save them. But then you see that skull above their attackers' heads and realize that it's probably not worth the trouble, since even just one of them could probably one-shot you. There are parts of town you legitimately don't want to get stuck in if you're underprepared or underleveled, which is a really great touch in making the city feel truly dystopian and realistic. The world also has some smaller details that I just think think are super rad. The Maelstrom, one of the in-game gangs, have these extreme body modifications and have a bright red motif with their eyes and some of their limbs. At night, Northside, an industrial district that the Maelstrom reside in, is lit with bright red lights, reminding you whose territory you're currently in. One thing you might notice through the game is these TV screens that are constantly playing ads and never play any actual shows or the news. That's because they're actually playing the advertisement channel, an entire channel dedicated to playing just ads. All around the world, you can find this graffiti on walls and in alleyways that says "No Future." I'm sure this has some kind of significance. I've seen that it might be a reference to a musical artist, but the prevalence of it throughout the world is eerie in a way. It feels almost like this fourth wall breaking warning to the player that this world they view through their screen is less of a fantasy than they may think, and if things continue to go the way they are, we might end up like Cyberpunk. And this is no future. Night City very much represents the diluted vices of humanity. Drugs, sex, violence, and consumerism are everywhere. The city itself represents the idea that these material objects will make you happy, that if you have enough money, you can have whatever you want. This is also seen in V's attitude at the start of the game, their goal being get as rich and as famous as I can, and believing that Night City is the place to do it. But even beyond that, the city itself is symbolism for everything that the cyberpunk genre itself represents. It is closer to our reality than some would like to admit, and at times feels less like a new world and more like an over-dramatization of our own, however small that exaggeration may be. Number 5. What it has to say. That's the same one as before. It's like I'm making some kind of symmetry here. What am I, George Lucas? Cyberpunk 2077 is indeed about death, and the way it tells its central idea both through the story and through gameplay is fascinating. V is given only a few weeks to live, and after that diagnosis you're given a multitude of missions and quest lines to play through, and they all follow an element of you finding a way out of death. Some jobs will follow you trying to find some kind of cure, some will follow you trying to find out what the thing that's killing you is and how it works. Some will follow you trying to find the people who hired you for that job that got you into this mess in the first place, but some will have nothing to do with any of that. They'll follow you helping out a friend you've met, which will often expand into a full side quest allowing you to connect with them further. The consciousness of Johnny Silverhand is living inside of you. Some of the quests will let you allow him to finish and make amends to some of the people he never got the chance to, which also expands into more side content. Doing these things can have an influence on the ending of the game, including giving you access to a secret ending. Remember when I said the game has a strong focus on letting you choose which parts of the story are most important? The gameplay reason for this is because it allows you to play through the missions in the order that you want, but the story reason is so much more than that. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that puts you in the shoes of a super cool cyborg mercenary in the near future, but more specifically, it puts you in the shoes of someone who's running out of time. The game asks you a simple but difficult to answer question. If you knew that you had a very short amount of time left in this world, what would you do with that time? Would you try everything in your power to stop yourself from slipping away, or would you use the time to surround yourself with people you love, spending as much time as you can with them until eventually there's no time left? I really want to keep this video spoiler free for this game, so I'm not going to discuss the ending, even though I think it is pretty brilliant. But I will say, the final question this game asks you is easily one of the most thought-provoking and, for lack of a better term, deep questions I've ever been presented with by a video game. That question being, is life worth living? And more importantly, if it's not, can you make it worth living? Can you make a life worth saving? I think I want to go back to the cowboy game now. Part 4! Return with the radioactive cowboy elixir. New Vegas and Cyberpunk are two incredibly different games, but comparing and contrasting their stories and the way that they're told can give us a real insight into how, even though they're told so differently, they still manage to be incredibly engaging. I think a good way to compare these two is, if Cyberpunk is Star Wars, New Vegas is The Mandalorian. Cyberpunk tells a consistent story where all of its various tightly packed plot threads are deeply deeply interconnected into a single story, whereas New Vegas tells multiple stories with vastly branching plot threads that are more or less collected under the main plot. However, for just a second, I want to focus on the main quest line in New Vegas, and the importance of character in a story. As I said earlier, New Vegas is a deeply political game. That was a while ago. I don't blame you if you don't remember that. I fully did not intend on this video being, oh my god, are you serious? New Vegas is a deeply political game, and this extends into the main plot as well. In contrast to the character-driven nature of Cyberpunk, New Vegas's narrative doesn't really focus on its characters or their development, and while some NPCs are certainly given much more of a spotlight, it instead opts to look at the political tug-of-war going on in the Mojave Wasteland. But what if I told you that New Vegas actually does have a strong focus on characters? Wouldn't that go against everything I spent too much time talking about? Well, no, because these people, they aren't the characters of the game. They are not the main actors in the game's plot. None of the humans, ghouls, super mutants, robots, or even the courier. The main characters of this game are the factions. The NCR, Caesar's Legion, Brotherhood of Steel, the Boomers, Great Khans, Followers of the Apocalypse, these are the true characters of the game. Let me put it like this. Cyberpunk 2077 is about V, and how they change and grow throughout the game's story and through your decisions. Fallout New Vegas is about the Mojave Wasteland, and how it changes and grows throughout the game's story and through your decisions. The game isn't about a personal journey or an intimate look at these people's lives, it's about the fate of the Strip. The Courier is not the protagonist of the main story. The protagonist is the world itself. The game doesn't need to develop its people because it's not about them. This is incredibly interesting, because on one hand, it's very cool seeing these video game factions from 2010 that are more complex than the good guys and the bad guys, where none of them are exactly perfect and pretty much no decision you make for any of them will be free of negative consequences. From an RPG narrative perspective, this is amazing storytelling. But on the other hand, if you're not into this idea of having almost no consistent, deep, or compelling human characters save for a couple, and the story being primarily focused on the politics of the apocalyptic world, it can make sticking with New Vegas's story a little difficult. It's incredible storytelling that is unique and non-traditional in some amazing ways, but that also means it can be hard to invest yourself into it. Cyberpunk, on the other hand, is a much more streamlined experience, which some would say is a negative, but I would argue is more of a positive. New Vegas gives players the freedom to do whatever they want, but in doing that, its greater narrative suffers from being unable to keep a consistent theme or story. Whereas Cyberpunk doesn't give the player as much freedom, but it does give them enough to feel like they have an impact on the story while still allowing the game to tell its own narrative. New Vegas is less of a video game and more of a virtual world to experience. If a Call of Duty campaign is Candyland, New Vegas is Dungeons and Dragons, and Cyberpunk strikes a pretty great middle ground between these two. It would be like Clue, I guess. Ultimately, you'll come to one of a few endings every time you play, but the game allows you to reach it in any way you want. It lets the player feel a clear sense of choice while also allowing for a curated story and finale. So, in summary, New Vegas lacks strength in its overarching narrative, but it makes up for it with player choice and heavy roleplay elements. Cyberpunk lacks strength in its greater player freedom, but it makes up for it with a more consistent story and compelling characters. And that's why Cyberpunk 2077 is better than Fallout New Vegas, but not really. Both of them just do some things better and worse than the other one. Like I said, New Vegas is in my greatest of all time collection on Steam. With Cyberpunk! Ha ha ha! It was there the whole time! Now here's the part where Truman goes on just a little rant. Cyberpunk was completely overlooked after its poor launch, with many people still holding the opinion that the reason people didn't like it wasn't because wasn't done yet, but because the game was just bad. The way that media criticism works on the internet is kind of broken because of a multitude of factors. Whenever anything comes out, especially if the opinion is that it's subpar or not very well done or it has a lot of technical issues, it becomes really popular to dunk on it and make fun of it and point out its imperfections. And because of things like Twitter algorithms, doing so will often get you a lot of likes and retweets, which in turn shows your post to more people, which encourages you to degrade the media even more, which keeps the hate train going. Now, I'm absolutely not saying Cyberpunk didn't deserve the criticism it got when it released. Like I said, it was not done yet. But often in the case of something like a Cyberpunk or a Last Jedi, where there's this massive movement of people criticizing the piece of media, analyzing it ends up getting really popular, and then it goes way farther and lasts so much longer than necessary that people who know nothing about the medium of which others are analyzing will want to get in on the fun, and proceed to endlessly nitpick whatever it is, often without ever legitimately interacting with the media or even interacting with it at all, which then results in people trying to criticize things that have no validity whatsoever, ultimately completely flooding online spaces and making it impossible to figure out if the comments people are making are actually in good faith. This critical stream clip sums it up pretty well.
I keep seeing that too much dialogue. I mean, everyone jerks off about The Witcher 3. That entire game was fucking dialogue. And Red Dead 2. That was all dialogue. Everyone parrots the same fucking opinions depending on whatever the most popular is, and right now it's to criticize every nook and cranny of the game. Like, so far it's not great. Like, it's a pretty slow start, but it's not bad. And too much dialogue is a dumb fucking complaint when everyone on Reddit and Twitter, the same people complaining about dialogue here, worship Witcher 3, Red Dead 2, and all that shit. I don't get it. Just make your own opinions and stop parroting what you think is the popular one.
A constant on the internet is people going into angry gamer mode and violently complaining whenever something isn't exactly what they want it to be. Whether it's a game not living up to promises, or an IGN review that has a score that they think the reviewer is faking and doesn't really believe in, or an honest IGN review that has a score the reviewer isn't faking and does believe in. It really doesn't matter. They're gonna be mad at IGN pretty much no matter what. Here's an idea, guys. Stop going to IGN, maybe. It's a website. You can just not go there. I have talked about how much I love Cyberpunk 2077 to several people, and more than one has verbatim said to me in response, but I thought that game sucked. The massive amount of hate this game got was in some ways justified, but in others became so over the top that it stopped being about showing executives who rushed the game out for a holiday release that it was a bad move, and became, how else can I get mad at Cyberpunk so I get upvotes? Because of that massive storm way back in early 2021, it kept a lot of people from experiencing this game. After patch 1.3, the game was considerably more stable, and after the latest 1.6 patch, which adds in multiple new features and fixes, the game really does feel finished. And by all means, it should have been that way when it initially released, but if you haven't played it yet, you should give it a chance and see the incredible work that the developers, writers, actors, and designers did for this game. The purpose of this video is to let you know that Cyberpunk 2077 is an amazing game that absolutely deserves your time. It's really less, this thing sucks and this thing is great, and more, both these things are great, but no one talks about this one. I've just started my second playthrough, and while the 1.7 patch and upcoming expansion will likely be the last we'll see of 2077, I'm still incredibly excited about whatever comes next, including the next game in the Cyberpunk series that they've sort of kind of announced. It's happening. We have no detail. It's happening, I guess. The story of Cyberpunk is one filled with emotion and meaning. It asks questions and poses answers to things that I have never seen in a video game before. Cyberpunk takes place in a harsh, futuristic landscape that we are currently hurtling towards. It claims that in a world of constant pain and suffering surrounded with superficial happiness, corruption, despair, and a feeling that there's nothing you can do to change anything, life is worth living. With the only caveat being, you have to fight for it, both against the world and against yourself, but that fight is worth it. There will always be people who are there for you, who will help kindle that fire inside you to keep fighting for life. And even though the world is uncertain or hard, if you use that flame to search for the people and the things that make you happy, to persevere to find true contentment and burn down the tall buildings that get in your way, then life will have a purpose. So, in conclusion, I'll leave you with the words of a dead man. Wake up, samurai. You've got a city to burn.
Be alone in my thoughts. Near on unachievable these days.